The Smoking Mirror, Chapter 15. Despite Johnny's good humor, Carol was nervous. Along the horizon, she could make out a line of black stretching off into the indistinct distance. As they drew closer, the ash gave way to hard-packed earth, the black road carving its somber way straight toward the heart of Miklan. Gradually, the dark line became a massive wall whose impossible length was broken every dozen or so miles by embedded minarets, massive spires that Carol figured must serve as watchtowers or forts. Oh, fun. Johnny's voice was flat, as if even his playfulness were sapped by the enormity of the construction. I'm not sure I really want to see what's on the other side of that wall. I mean, that's some impressive architecture, but yeah, I hear you. They continued in awed silence as the wall loomed higher and higher. Soon they saw that the black road led right up to a pair of dauntingly huge gates wrought of some slate-colored metal and flanked by obsidian towers. Beside the towers perched a half-dozen winged humanoid creatures with the faces of women, some with hideous beaks, some feathered, others leathery. All of them were snarling. Harpies, Carol muttered. Aren't those from Greek mythology? Well, yeah, but I guess if they're real, they'd probably pop up in all mythologies. Ah, yeah, you're right. Don't like much like us, huh? The twins stopped about 100 yards away. The harpies howled and spat a rain of nasty smelling saliva that pattered the sand in front of their feet. Johnny glanced around, nodding absently. So, this is an insane question, but how do we get in? As if in answer, the heavy gates began to groan open, and a dozen wraiths swirled through the gap to materialize before the twins. Carol's mouth went dry as she scrutinized them. Gray, nearly mummified flesh stretched across their angular bones, and their eyes glowed like hot coals above ragged nostril holes and predatory teeth. They wore thick, brine-soaked leather armor across chest, forearms, and shins, as well as bone helmets, filigreed in copper with hideous designs. Each of them bore a club, fashioned of copper, wood, or bone, along the lengths of which had been embedded shards of obsidian. One of the undead warriors had a black stripe running horizontally across his eyes. He stepped closer and spoke in a raspy, guttural voice. By order of the Achalam, puissant lords of Shibalba, dread capital of Miklan, you are now captives of the city guard. Accompany us immediately, or we will drag your living bodies through the streets by force. Johnny raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. No problem. We were headed this way anyhow, and we could use a zombie escort. Carol shot him a look. Are you an idiot? She thought at him. Do you see those weapons? Calm down, sheesh. I just don't want them to think that we're afraid of them. I am afraid. Well, duh, me too, but they don't need to know that. The captain of the guard made an impatient gesture, and the twins walked through the gates, herded by the other undead warriors. The vista that unfolded was one of densely packed gray buildings, lining twisting side streets, punctuated by black spires and towering mansions. Gritty smog hung like a shroud over the metropolis, deepening the natural gloom of Miklan. Swooping lazily through the haze or clinging to rooftops were vast murders of crows and wakes of vultures. The closest swiveled their heads hungrily at Carol and Johnny as the twins entered Shibalba. Cutting a broad swath through the midst of the city, the Black Road became an ample avenue upon which these strange figures made their way to mysterious destinations. More of the gray-skinned undead shambled along the cobblestones, along with cloaked skeletons, headless monsters, assorted were-creatures, and tall demigods of dark and deadly beauty. From time to time, shadowy forms would flit by, too fast or insubstantial to be clearly perceived, and occasionally a carriage drawn by magic or gruesome beasts would shudder past. Whoa, Welcome to Emerald City's Twisted Sister, huh? Johnny quipped, trying to shrug off the overwhelming strangeness. Carol doubted that his whistling in the dark would work this time. There's no getting away from this place unscathed. There must be hundreds of thousands of monsters here. Led by the city guard, the twins made their way down that dark boulevard, their shape-shifting still blocked by the white ash that clung to their skin and clothes. 3 rivers crossed their path, spanned by bridges made of human bone. In the first river, huge scorpions floated, fought, or flailed their tails angrily against the black water. As Carol glanced at the roiling scene in horror, a dozen humanoid creatures with scales and gills erupted from beneath the surface, impaling a good number of scorpions with bone harpoons before diving back under the current, pulling their prey along with them. "Oh, look," muttered Johnny. "Creatures from the Black Lagoon." "You are too weird." "Weird? Carol, are your eyes even open? My weirdness is like super average behavior compared to this whack place." Johnny had less to say as they crossed over the second river, a sluggish stream of red from which rose a faint warmth and with it a sickly stench. Gnats and flies and other vermin buzzed on its crimson surface. Blood. There is a river of blood under my feet. Carol bit back the urge to scream. The final bridge spanned an even more disgusting flow, a rank-smelling, brown-colored tributary on the surface of which floated clots of rancid pus teeming with maggots. Carol retched, acid burning at her throat. "I'm going to be sick," she thought at her brother. "Just try to hold it down. They want to gross us out. It'd make them real happy to see our weakness." After the rivers, the avenue widened, expanding into strange parks in which dark moss-festooned trees loomed obliquely over granite benches and sulfur-rich fountains. In the distance, an enormous shadowy shape began to coalesce. After a few minutes, Carol realized it was a huge ziggurat, one that dwarfed Huitzilopochtli's temple. At its base stood a palatial structure with wickedly sharp arches and pillars in the shape of serpents twined around dying women. When they reached the base of the steps that led up to the building's shadowy portico, the captain of the guard stopped them. "You are ignorant living children, so I will instruct you as to the proper etiquette. This is the mitnal, the council chamber of the Halob. As you enter the presence of the 13, you will prostrate yourselves in obeisance." Johnny cocked his head. What?" Carol touched his arm gently. "They want us to lie down on the floor to show our respect." "Dude, I know what it means. He's just crazy if he thinks I'm going to kiss their bony asses like that." The undead warrior scoffed harshly. "If you do not show the proper deference, knave, you will be obligated to do so. Once satisfied with your groveling, High Lord Kisin will bid you stand. At that point, the audience will begin. You are to remain still throughout. We will escort you out again once judgment has been passed." "Wait, judgment?" Carol blanched. "Do you mean that this is a trial?" "Of course it is, wench. You are living humans, trespassing in Miklan, standing on the very avenue of the dead in Shibalba. Your violations of the Dark Lord's decrees carry a weighty price." "Our hearts," Johnny's voice echoed in her mind. "They're gonna rip out our hearts. The little people said we'd be okay. We swallowed the jade." "I'm not feeling real confident about the jade right now, dude." Prompted by the deadly clubs, the twins ascended the steps, crossed the portico, and stepped through 2 copper-plated doors into a large chamber dominated by an elevated dais. It was furnished with a curved granite fixture that reminded Carol of the bench the Supreme Court sat at. Ringing the base of the dais stood 6 armored were-creatures with differing features. They were mainly hominoid, but with the animal characteristics of a crocodile, stag, wolf, ape, jaguar, and vulture. Each clasped a huge obsidian-tipped spear. Before them, in an oval depression that separated the platform from the rest of the chamber, a red-robed and hooded figure lifted a bony claw and announced in a gravelly voice, "Abase yourselves before the lords of the Black Quarter. Apuku, Hunhao, and Akan." The guards pushed on Carol's shoulders till she knelt. From the shadows behind the dais emerged three tall, gaunt figures garbed in black feathers and adorned with obsidian jewelry. Their faces were skulls that protruded through rotting, peeling flesh. Their eyes glowed a deep, unnatural blue. The trio took their places, folding themselves into high-backed thrones toward the middle of the bench. "Tremble before the lords of the Red Quarter. You all take quickly. You all see what. And some demo." Another three beings stepped from the shadows. They wore no robes or capes. Instead, exposed muscle and meat glistened red and slick, as if the skin had been flayed away. Wreaths of fire encircled their bloody heads, and their eyes were like burning coals. They took up positions near the lords of the Black Quarter, leaving a single throne between the two groups. "Okay, I am officially freaking out," she thought at Johnny, her heart beating madly. "Just pretend it's a real gory horror flick. I hate horror." Ooh, that's right. Crap. "Look on the lords of the White Quarter, and no despair. Techlotl, Quesali, and Itzkoliwiki." Pale, corpse-like demons wrapped in shrouds floated across the dais. Dazzling white tongues of fire danced above their heads. Their eye sockets were empty, but the blackness within bored into Carol as they arranged themselves at the far left edge of the bench. They can see into me, she realized. They know my weaknesses. "Lastly, the lords of the Green Quarter, sickly sweet and source of rot, Chalmecatl, Chalmecasiwatl, and Neshoshotcho." The trio that appeared next were rotting corpses whose moldy flesh was covered by moss, toadstools, and strange lichens. Bright poisonous flowers encircled their foreheads, and their bodies teemed with beetles, worms, and flies. Snakes wriggled out of their mouths and into their eye sockets as they took up spots at the far right end of the dais. "Okay, now even I am grossed out." Johnny winked at her. "Now, prostrate yourselves, humans, before the chief of this council, speaker of the Ahalob, High Lord Kisin." A very tall and very thin man strode slowly from the darkness. His dark skin clung tightly to his skull, and his lank black hair spilled down his back. He was dressed in what appeared to be elegant Spanish clothing from the 16th century: a white silk shirt, black velvet doublet and breeches, and blood-red leather boots and jerkin that Carol suddenly suspected were made of human skin. As Kisin lowered his dark brown eyes upon the twins, Carol slumped face first onto the floor, her arms outstretched. Beside her, Johnny did the same. "That jerk used magic to make me go all prostrate. Son of a..." "Stop, Johnny. Let him have his fun. Remember what we're here for. We need to get past them and get Mom." "Twins. Once more." Keesing's voice was smooth and rich, but also cold and haughty. The voice of a sociopath. "How I tire of twins. Nonetheless, as living beings, you have trespassed in both Miklan and its capital city, Xibalba. You have thereby violated the natural order established by the Dark One and your own feathered worm. You have further ignored edicts handed down by the Lord and Lady of Death by traveling the Black Road and using force against its guardians. Have you aught to say in your defense, urchins?" Johnny pushed himself up, regarding High Lord Kisin with anger and disgust. If being alive in Miklan is a violation of the natural order, then Tescat did it first. He brought our mom to this stupid place, and I'm pretty sure he wanted us to come looking for her. So, yeah, this is jacked up. Stop pretending like you freaks have justice down here, and let's move on to the sentencing, okay? Though Carol was frightened out of her wits, she felt a surge of pride in her brother. She wanted to applaud or hug him. Keesing's power, of course, held her firmly in place. The High Lord grimaced and gestured dismissively. Johnny's face slammed against the cold stone floor with a crunching thud. Very well, Juan Angel and Carolina Garza. The Ajalo declare you guilty to your hypocritical course. You are sentenced to die upon the great temple of Tezcatlipoca at the end of 2 more watches, 16 of your living hours. Once your young hearts have been reaped from your chests, we will feast on them. Then your shades will wend their fleshless way to annihilation at the center of Miklan. 2 guards seized them by the shoulders and yanked them to their feet. In the interim, you are remanded to the Kwawakali to await the ceremony that will end your meaningless lives. Keesing turned his back on them and faded into the darkness. The other lord stood as one and floated backward into the shadows as well. The Kwawakwali was a sort of stone dungeon beneath the Mitnal. Carol sat on the cold floor of their cell, scrubbing at the ash with her hands, trying to dust enough of it off to access her tonal. She believed that the little people hadn't lied, and that somehow the jade would protect them from being sacrificed. But she didn't want to depend solely on that. It would be really good if we could shift and fly the heck out of here. Johnny simply leaned back against the rough wall, tapping out a beat against the stolen shield with his fingers and humming some of that weird techno music he loves so much. His dark hair spiked out in all directions, and the ash on his skin made him appear almost ghost-like. The black clothes he'd formed from Huitzilopochtli's cape had turned nearly gray with the dust. It must look as bad. I really need a bath. Don't suppose they have water around here, though. She thought about the nasty rivers they'd crossed and gave a little shudder.